So the question is as follows. Have trade wars led to real wars? Because right now we're having quote unquote trade tariffs, trade embargo, and trade wars. So you go from, some tariffs, right? You have some trade tariffs, which is always an issue. Then you have a trade embargo, okay, which is a little stronger. But then you have an actual trade war. Okay. The question is this: has this created at any point in time a real problem? Is there a historical point? So I'm going to show you that historical, yes, that has happened. And then I'm going to show you that what's happening right now could actually lead to something like that. The Opium Wars, 1839 to 1842. These are conflicts that ended up being actual wars. It was sparked by Britain with a trade imbalance with China and China's crackdown on the opium imports. What began as a trade dispute escalated into full-scale wars, leading to the Treaty of Nanking and other unequal treaties. This was a direct example of a trade dispute that turned into a war. You had the Anglo-Dutch Wars from 1652 to 1674. Rivalry over maritime trade routes and mercantile policies. This is important for you to understand the historical concept, because right now what we have some pretty strong tariffs on some very strong countries. Some of them are being discussed, they're being put on, they've been put out, put on, but some of them are remaining. Remember, there's a 50% tariff on India. There's a 50% tariffs on Brazil, right? Some of these countries, 39% on Switzerland. These are not trade wars because they're not, obviously, no one is fighting back against those tariffs, but they're not trade embargoes. We're not. It's not like we're closing the business completely, like the U.S. is doing with Cuba, but they're getting pretty close on some of them. So historically, you had the Anglo-Dutch Wars, where the root cause was rivalry over maritime trade routes and mercantile policies between 1652 and 1674. So that caused the war. Oh yeah, but that was so long ago. The American Revolutionary War, 1775, 1783. Right? Essentially, you had economic grievance, including trade restrictions, the Tea Act. Remember the Tea Party? We had mercantilist controls were central to the colonies' revolt. It wasn't purely a trade war, but it was economic trade restriction were a key trigger. Let's be aware of this. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it's never going to happen. In this case, it has happened. We have had trade, quote-unquote, wars or trade frictions that have led to wars. Okay? The War of 1812 between the U.S. versus Britain. U.S. declared war partly over British trade restriction and blockades during the Napoleonic Wars. It was a maritime trade disputes and impressment of sailors escalated into an open war. So it has happened. We have had wars started because of trade. Oh, but that was 1812. That was bad. Okay, let's come back further. How about World War II? How about Japan? The U.S., okay, this is getting closer now. The U.S. imposed oil and metal embargoes on Japan. And what do you think happened in response to Japanese expansion into Asia? Well, Japan needed to expand. They needed to grow. Japan viewed this as an existential economic threat, and that's why they attacked Pearl Harbor. So the trade restriction acted as a catalyst for war. It does happen. You can start with a trade dispute, trade embargo, and trade wars, and then it turns into real wars. It has happened over and over and over. Now, there were certain instances where it didn't happen. Like, for example, this famous one that's used by the president, the Smooth-Haley Tariff Act of 1930, which triggered retaliatory tariffs worldwide, deepening the Great Depression, but no direct shooting war resulting from those tariffs. So, they retaliated. Are they going to retaliate? We shall see. So far, no one has dared to retaliate because that would be a trade war. There is a U.S.-China trade war. That's the only one that's going back and forth from 2018 to present. There's high tariffs, supply chain battles, tech restriction, but it's staying in the economic realm. So you got this thing going on right now between China and U.S. Hey, Fuji, welcome to join us again. Thank you very much. So we're talking about, can a trade war lead us to real war? Right? Let's find out, because that's what this channel is about. This channel is about understanding the potential risks that we face so we could do something about it, at least be aware of it. Okay? And what I'm saying is, historically, there have been historical cases where you had trade wars that turned into actual war. And the last one that keeps on going, that keeps on feeding, that keeps on fueling is the one between China and the US. There is no real conclusion here. We have to watch this one very carefully. We're not talking about the Ukraine situation. This is really between China and the US. I mean, the world is changing very quickly. Okay. And frankly, what we're seeing a lot of issues having to do with the fact that this could actually become an issue at some point. Okay. Why? Well, because essentially what you have, yeah, we shall care about all these things that we want to talk about. But basically, there has been such a situation happening. So yes, history shows that trade wars can and have led to real wars, especially when economic restriction threatens a nation's survival or power projection. But in many cases, they remain confined to the economic arena. But right now, I mean, can we say that we have economic restrictions threaten the nation's survival? Well, no. I mean, as long as China keeps sending send to the U.S. it's antibiotics, it's vitamin C, it's medication, then the U.S. should be fine. But the day that, or it's rare minerals, as long as China keeps sending that to the U.S., the U.S. should be fine. If for some reason China decided not to do that, what would the U.S. be willing to do to go and get it? Because right now, this is what's going on. There's discussion between the U.S. and China in terms of actually deciding, how we're going to work together, how we're going to, and there's been a 90-day reprieve. Nothing is really going on right now. They're deciding what they want to do, but at this point, no one has decided anything, and it's being postponed. Now, are the U.S. tariffs right now the way they are? Are they used as an embargo, like what happened in Cuba? Well, not exactly. I mean, while the U.S. tariffs policy are aggressive and politically motivated, they're not technically amount to full embargo. Although an embargo is a complete ban on trade, and you don't have that, right? But tariff impose taxes on import, but do not prohibit trade. But when the tariff is that high, how high and how much can you push? I mean, Cuba is a true embargo. I'm not saying that that's what we're having, but we are a step closer to it. Right? Current U.S. tariff actions. I mean, the U.S. imposed 50% tariffs on a wide ranging of Brazilian exports, citing political tension linked to former President Bolsonaro. So you're kind of poking at the bear when you do things like that. Well, of course, you figure I'm not afraid of the Brazilian bear. And Brazil has responded by seeking WTO consultation, World Trade Organization consultation. What does that mean? Well, basically, right now, that's actually came out today. U.S. accepts Brazil WTO consultation request over the tariffs. They're saying this is not fair what you're doing. The United States has accepted a request for consultation from Brazil as it imposed on its good, even as it argued that levies are a matter of national security, according to the document posted on the website. The U.S. is saying, I'm charging 50% on Brazil because of national security. President Trump slapped a 50% tariff on most Brazilian import earlier this month. And they're saying, listen, this is serious. pay attention. You're talking about Ukraine and Russia. Meanwhile, we're being charged 50. Why? In response to what he called a witch hunt against his Brazilian ally, former President Jair Bolsonaro, who is on trial on charge of plotting a coup following his election loss in 2022. They're saying you're abusing my friend here, so I am going to impose 50% tariff on Brazil. That is not an embargo. That is not a trade war. But 50% is, you can't do business with an additional 50% cost. So we are poking the Brazilian bear here in some fashion. Okay? So they're requesting consultation. And frankly, a consultation, essentially, we want to talk about it. Right? We want to, in a statement, President says so I want to go in front of the World Trade Organization and I want to talk about this because I don't understand what it is. So this is the first time that, they're fighting back. And you can't say it's a trade deficit because actually the U.S. export more to Brazil than it imports. So it's not that. Okay. So that's what's happening with Brazil. And despite their severity, their measure are tariffs. They're not embargoes. So it's not an embargo. We're not saying the U.S. is not saying that they don't want Brazilian goods. They're just saying there's a 50% tariff. India. Okay, and Brazil. Okay, fine. How about India? The U.S. escalated tariff as high as 50%, targeting India's continued imports of Russian oil. This move is characterized as a sanction and or even an economic embargo by critics in India. So India is saying is using the word embargo. See, and this is what this channel is about, right? Well, we're here to figure out what's really going on here. Let's figure out how these things are going to happen before they actually happen. No big surprise. For example, during the time over at, when you had COVID, people said, well, COVID, come on. They're not going to force us to stay in our homes. And they did. Okay, so things can happen. So Brazil has responded. So this move is being characterized as an embargo by India. But in legal terms, there are still tariffs. Okay. How about Canada? A high-stake trade war is ongoing with tariffs hitting almost all imported goods. 25% their baseline and more in specific category. These remain very high tariffs, but supply continues, and it's not an embargo. So we're looking at the Canadian bear, the Mexican bear, the Indian bear, and of course there's China. There it's a bit different. And this is where you have to understand that what I know, they know. And I want you to know. After a year high tariff, a 90-day truce reset has been reset between US and China to 30% and 10%. So basically 30% of US import from China and 10% imports from the US. But trade continues openly. This is not an embargo. We're still talking. Now you will notice when it comes to China, the US is not saying, you know what, 50% for you too. They're not saying that with China. They're a little bit more careful. Okay. And Venezuela, the US introduced a 20% on tariff to buy, introduced a 25% tariff on countries that buy Venezuelan oil. Isn't that what started all wars? Well, you keep pushing and bugging and tugging, and eventually somebody gets pissed enough that, this is how Japan, World War II. How do we do that? Well, this is one of the cases that I made earlier, is that the U.S. imposed an oil and metal in 1940 and 1941 in response to Japanese expansion in Asia. And guess what happened? It does happen. It is not just an impossibility. So basically, Brazil, India, Canada, Mexico, China, Venezuela. I'm not even mentioning Switzerland at 39%, but they're all getting hit pretty hard, except China that's getting a reprieve. Although 30% is not too bad. So the U.S. has not instituted embargoes, but instead it has ramped up tariffs. Now, these are tariffs that haven't been since the 1930s. So how much more can you push before you push too far? These are not legal or functioning, though they can come close in impact for affected industry. That's what Brazil is saying, guys, this is not fair. Nobody's going to buy coffee with 50% more. I am not going. So let me know. So this is an issue. Okay. Now, of course, what you will notice is that, is there a pattern in how the U.S. is using the tariffs? Well, the U.S. strategy is not evenly applied. It tends to lean harder on smaller or weaker trade partners, while showing more restraint with larger rivals such as China. Right? They don't want to push too hard on China here, because if you push too hard, what could happen, right? Basically, the U.S. presses harder on weaker state is because there's asymmetry of dependence. Smaller economies rely more heavily on the U.S. market. They're saying, you need me more than I need you, therefore I'm going to hit you. That makes tariffs more coercive. That's the word, coercion. The U.S. administration is coercing the smaller countries into doing what they want them to do. Plus, there's lower retaliation risk. China can retaliate massively, right? China tomorrow could say, you know what? No more Apple for you. No more rare earth mineral. No more medication. No more antibiotic. No more vitamin C. I'm stopping everything. Brazil and India cannot retaliate at the same scale. So, obviously, the U.S. is very, very, very careful. Geopolitical leverage. Tariffs are used as bargaining chip in non-trade disputes. Domestic optics. Politically standing up to foreign nations plays well, but it's a tough thing to do. So what are the strategic implications? Because what I'm trying to tell you right now is we are moving our way slowly towards something that could end up in a war. Don't forget, right next door, we also have the Ukraine and Russia situation that's moving very slowly. They're being slow walked into an agreement, which is going to put the U.S. in the middle, maybe not on the ground, but in the air. This channel, and I want you to join this channel because we're monitoring all these risks. Because, we're slow walking ourselves into some very interesting situation, which once started cannot be undone, right? I mean, the administration is not going to say, oh, you know what? Forget the 50% tariffs on India. Why? It's going to hit at the end of August. Why? Why not? Why are you stopping now? Is this a taco thing all over again? They don't want to be treated that way, so they're going to keep going and going. Now, you got Russia and you got Ukraine, and we'll have a live on what's really going on with that. But basically, right now, the U.S. says, okay, we're going to, having to do with the Nobel Peace Prize and all that, but basically, it doesn't matter. The point is that the U.S. is saying, okay, I am going to I'm going to give you the security guarantees. And they say, what do you mean a security guarantees? Guarantees of what? You're not going to put boots on the ground. No. We're just flying some planes back and forth. And as we fly the planes, then hopefully that will help out and that will keep you under control and nothing bad will really happen. Well, I don't know about that because we are just slow walking ourselves with those fire and, all these things that could potentially. So the big question is this. What's going on, therefore, between China and Russia? Since we don't, China and the U.S., since we don't really care what Brazil does and India, because not much they can do, right? But the U.S. depends on China big time. So what happens after 90 days, right? What happens if no agreement is reached at the end of that window? So both sides could escalate because obviously China is saying, I'm not taking it, right? I am not taking it. What's going on? But they could decide to go their own ways. You know what? If we can agree, then you go my way, you go your way, I go my way. Well, I don't even know if that's possible. On the U.S. side, raising tariffs further, right, from the 30% that China is being hit at right now, escalating export control on semiconductors, AI, and defense-related tech, and encouraging reshoring. And that's kind of, isn't that what the U.S. is doing right now? Right? The semiconductors. What did the U.S. do recently? Do you know? Do you realize that the U.S. actually took a stake in Intel? They took away they took that $100 billion that Biden was giving Intel. I said, listen, we're not giving you just cash. We want equity. We're going to take position in your firm because we want to start building more semiconductors today. Today we want to build semiconductors, not 5 years from now. We need to be more proactive on semiconductors. And they're all like, well, I mean, hold on. Now you want to do semiconductors? What do you mean? A U.S. company is being taken or owned now by by government? 10%? Are you nationalizing it? No, he was talking to them. I'm not nationalizing. We just want to make sure the money is used efficiently. We just want to give you $100 billion. Okay, so but the U.S. right now is making sure that, listen, just in case tomorrow they don't send us, I don't know, maybe they know something I don't or something you don't, but maybe there's something going on that they know, at this point, they're doing the same analysis I'm doing right now. They're thinking, well, what if you can't agree with China? And as usual, I want my subscribers to understand before it happens. It drives me mad, and all we're doing is we're reading the news. Oh, look, Trump is meeting with the Ukraine president. I wonder why. What do you think? Well, he's going to talk about Ukraine. No, this is not about Ukraine. This is about China again. They want to make sure that Russia stay away from China because they've got this thing, the 90 days. When the 90 days are up, what is China going to do? If China is cutting U.S. companies from Chinese markets like Apple, Tesla, Boeing are vulnerable, using rare earth mineral as leverage and pushing Belt and Road partners, in Africa, to pivot trades away from the U.S. They're going to say, you know what? We don't need the U.S. anymore. Let's just do our thing because we can't get along with them. So, but can you have a clean break? Can you do away without China? It's going to be difficult. A deep trade interdependence. China still supply 75% of U.S. rare earth magnets, essential for defense and EVs. You need those. And obviously, they are not being really forthcoming like they used to with the earth magnet as an indication that they don't want to give you the magnets that you're going to put in the missile that you're going to throw on their heads. All right, that's a sign right there. They don't really want to give that stuff away on not too many. They're giving it away, but as long as it's for phone. But when it comes to weapons, they are a lot more hesitant. In fact, U.S. companies, defense companies, having issues. They can't source the thing anymore. Financial linkage. China holds hundreds of billions of dollars in U.S. Treasury, and dollar clearing is still vital for Chinese banks. So they can't. That's a service side economy from the U.S. They don't want to get away with that. Multinational exposure. U.S. firms depend heavily on Chinese sales, so they're not going to do away with the Chinese sales. Oh, yeah, but they can't agree. So what is the likely outcomes if the talks fail? Well, escalation of tariffs. The U.S. could push tariffs to 50% on Chinese goods. Chinese could retaliate with selective bans. Agriculture, aviation. We could start having some selective decoupling where strategic sector like semiconductor, AI decouple faster while consumer good clothing continues to flow. You could have true dual trade blocks. You could have global recession risks. We're slowing everything down with these tariffs and these people that can't agree. They don't want to talk to each other. And then they don't do anything. Then they wait and they wait and they wait. The bottom line is this. If the U.S. and China don't agree after 90 days, they can't fully go their own way immediately, but their economies are too entangled. But what is more realistic is a partial decoupling. And I told you about the decoupling of China. China is slowly decoupling from what's happening. Critical industries splitting into separate ecosystems, but consumer trade continuing because either side can't replace it quickly. However, over the next 5 to 10 years, if the escalation continues, the world could split into two competing economic blocs: the US and its allies, Europe, I guess, versus China and its BRIC partners. The signs are there, my friends. Slowly but surely, when there's a divorce, who's taking the kids? Are you taking the kids? I'm taking the kids. Who's taking the dogs? Who's taking the house? I can't stand you anymore. We need to split. And the reason we need to split because we can't agree on anything. And obviously the US cannot agree on China anymore. Look at it. It's happening in front of you. I want you not to just realize it once you read the news. It's happened. Oh my God, I didn't realize. And this is important. Why? Because it impacts the stock market, which is a whole-time high. Right? Yesterday, look what happened. Right? The market, the Nasdaq went down because someone said, someone said that. Altman, the AI guy, said, "Well, I mean, take it easy. Maybe it's not this AI thing. May not all it's cracked up to be." And boom, the Nasdaq fell, which is basically the S&P, frankly. And let's see what's happening today. Is it doing any better? And that's why I tell my subscribers and but more importantly, my membership, my members to go with the small caps, which I made a few recommend. The market is down again for the Nasdaq, by the way. Okay, it's down another almost 1%. Tech chips sell-off continues as the AI bubble fears mount. I was going to do damn, I should have done it. I was going to do a live on the AI bubble, but I say, you guys are not interested in that kind of stuff because it's it's all about stocks and. I know. And the tech stock sell-off continues as AI bubble. I mean, the concern that they're having, and I said that in one of my membership videos, that you need to make sure that, you need to be invested because there's always a fear of missing out, but be careful because this bubble is pretty high. And this bubble is really driven by the tech stocks. And when we say tech stock, we're talking 4 or 5 stocks. So it's not S&P 500, it's S&P 7. So be very careful because you don't want to come in on Monday morning, and this is exactly what happened. Boom, huge. Somebody said something. Oh my God, it's overpriced, and it just collapsed. Okay, so second, as investors sold off a slew of stake in them because what's his name said something about that, and he said it's too high. The report followed commentary from OpenAI Altman shortly after the ChatGPT maker finished out its latest multi-million-dollar funding round. You believe there is an AI bubble, a diversion from its prior characterization. Now, this is a CEO of OpenAI who owns ChatGPT that tells you that there is an AI bubble. I mean, we could see that it's kind of a bubble somewhere. Why? But it's too late by then. Right, it's too late. The news is out. You should have thought about this last week, right? Like right now, what you should be thinking about is what is going on with this Ukraine thing going with Russia, and then you have this thing going on with China, right? What's going to happen? Well, I mean, be careful because medication could start becoming very expensive, right? If you have defense stocks. Right, if you're, and I think they're having issues right now because they can't source the rare earth mineral. They cannot get the rare earth mineral, some of them. So it's difficult. They're not complaining. They're not saying I don't have it because then their stock is going to collapse. But frankly, they are not doing so well if you're looking at defense stocks. And if you have no stocks whatsoever, well, you shouldn't need to worry about, I don't know, you have somebody that's in the army right now. They may be sending some people overseas pretty soon. No, but because they said that they're not going to have boots on the ground. They're just going to be flying over. Well, okay. And do you think the MAGA people are going to agree to something like that? Do you think that they're gonna say, oh, you know what, it's okay. You could send, as long as it's a plane. It's still American lives that are at risk. And the MAGA people do not want that. And somehow, what's going to happen they're getting more and more concerned that it's not so much a fear, right? It because it's not just about, well, let's wait until it happens and let's see if we're courageous enough to face it. No, no. I want you to not so much be critical of what's happening, but at least analyze what's happening and understand it. And then if you're okay with it, that's fine. If you think that going to war is okay or not going to war or tariffing or whatever, but at least be aware of your surroundings because it's going to impact it. It's going to impact you in terms of jobs. The stock market is definitely going to be impacted pretty soon because the stock market cannot take too much rocking, right? All that guy had to say was, some guy, I mean, it's not some guy, he's the CEO of ChatGPT, basically. And he says, I believe there is an AI bubble, and the market collapsed. Why you have to say that for? It's like, you weren't aware? No, you're aware, but just people don't want to hear. What do people want to hear? Well, mostly they have the attention of a fly, quite frankly. And how do I know? Because I could see the amount of time that actually people spending listening to analysis is probably like a minute at most. At most, it's a minute. It's on average 45 seconds. Right? And just flipping this thing through, which is okay if it's but this is not entertainment purposes. This is actually, we actually to learn something. Because if you don't learn, then they will teach you. And unfortunately, when you say, well, how do I learn? Where do I go? Where shall I? Well, unfortunately, wherever you go, the news is extremely biased, one way or the other. They are telling you what you want to hear. And of course, but not everybody is like that. The one people that actually make the money, they try to understand what's happening so they could take position ahead of time. And that's why I'm trying to do this with this channel to help you guys actually understand the big premiere is coming. The show is not over. That's right. That's right. What do you think is going to happen? So you got two big major. I mean, obviously the tariffs are a component of one. But you have the Ukrainian and the Russian. They want to talk, right? If you think for 1 second Russia is going to go home after they have started a war economy, it would take them at least 1 to 2 years to pull it back. They're going to go home and don't forget, these people have been taken out of their jobs to start making weapons. You want them to go back in their jobs the next day and that's going to happen just like that? No way, no way. So he's going to ask for more and more things. In fact, today, the Lavrov guy, who's the foreign minister of Russia, said, whoa, I want to veto power. I want to know what's going on with this. We're big friend with Trump, but still, we want to make sure first of all, we don't want any foreign troops in Ukraine. Okay, we told you that already and you're not listening. We don't want foreign troops in Ukraine. Okay, and we want to veto what's going on in terms of security guarantees. So therefore, nothing is going to happen. But yet, Trump is being very nice. President's very nice, and they're pushing slowly but surely, because I think he truly wants his Nobel Peace Prize, and he's going to do whatever he can to get it. Because once he has an idea, he's going to go through with it. And you have to understand that as well. So I don't know where at some point someone says, "Halt, we're not doing it," right? Doing the work that is that's true. God says that if you have economic and international experience, we Americans, even us vet, are so gullible and so lazy when it comes to doing the work that is necessary. Whoa, sometimes there is, okay, the one thing we always manage to think is that time is everything was in place. He doesn't, well, no, he did 6 deals in 6 months. He literally stopped 6 wars in 6 months, which he did fine, but just give him the peace prize, go away. But pushing these two people together, right, is dangerous. And I will tell you what is dangerous. It's dangerous even if you don't have a war. The problem is that the whole House of Republicans is leaning and is standing on top of the MAGA people. And the MAGA people do not want any more wars from the U.S. point of view, which frankly nobody should want it. So the more you talk about getting in there, first it was somehow, then they said, listen, you got to be more precise. You can't just say we're gonna give security guarantees and we're gonna help out. What does it actually mean? You have to be more direct. Well, what it doesn't mean is no boots on the ground, fine. And what else does it mean? Well, then we're gonna fly over and help out. But you still have U.S. soldiers out there, and that means you got people involved in the fight. And you're going to see very soon that the MAGA people are going to come out and say, no. The reason I think they're not coming out that strong is because they know that's not going to happen. Okay, because very unlikely that Ukraine is, first of all, give up 20% of its. And then if Ukraine wants to give up, they're going to say, well, Donald, I want you in the middle of this fight with us. And they say, well, I can't be in the fight. Well, then I don't want it. And even if you said yes, and the other guy says yes, then the Russians are going to say, well, hold on. I told you, I don't want any. So that's going to postpone, and everything gets postponed. So that should be okay. But in the process of this, the administration is damaging its relationship with MAGA, and it's going to need it at the end of for next year. If it doesn't have it, then it won't be able to do all the things it's supposed to be doing. Don't forget, the U.S. administration is doing some pretty strong thing. Back to our theme of the day, which is you're charging India 50%. You're charging China 30%. You're charging Venezuela, which probably nobody cares. Your Switzerland is at 39%. Canada, you're upsetting the children here. You realize that, and of course, if it's going to go away, there's a taco trade. But if you're not talking about it, you forgot about it, you're moving on to something else, and meanwhile, Brazil is saying, guys, I mean, it's 50%. Who's going to buy my coffee with 50% premium? And for what reason? Trade is not supposed to be at that. So trade is supposed to be about trade, right? You want to eat? You want coffee? I sell you coffee. What are we? What does that have to do with the former president? What are you doing? What is the point? And you have to be careful, because when you get into these things, like I said before, you push it up a notch. I mean, if it's a trade tariff is one thing. If it's an embargo is something else. What if it's a war? What if, because Brazil, of course, these countries that the U.S. is going after are really weaker countries. There's not much they can do to the U.S. Militarily, definitely not. And trade-wise, the U.S. doesn't really need Brazil to sell anything to Brazil to make any money. The U.S. doesn't need to sell anything to anyone, quite frankly, except that it needs a lot of stuff from China. That's the problem. They realize that we fell asleep, and now we need all these things from China, and we can't decouple from them. And they're asking us this and that, and this is not helping, right? And we want them to bring stuff over. Then, did you see China sending $1 billion to the U.S. to build a plant or something? Do you see them doing any of that? No, they're not going to do that because they don't have to. In fact, they're in the process decoupling. You're gonna have the U.S. and maybe Europe together, and then you're gonna have on the other side China and the BRICS people, maybe Russia, maybe not. I mean, Trump is trying to keep Putin in check and trying to have him, keep your enemy closer, keep your friend close. But that's kind of what he's trying to do right now. But is this going to work? Because if it doesn't work, then one day you're gonna get up in the morning and you're gonna say, "Oh my God, there's a war." But what happened? I don't know. We were flying flights over Ukraine, and one of them got shot by we don't even know who it is. It might have been the Ukrainian doing it on purpose. Who knows? And then what do you do now? Right? So nobody's talking about making money here. We're just talking. See, and this has happened in the past. I will tell you that wars have started about the tariff. The most famous one, obviously, is the kind of the last one, which is World War II. The U.S. I hope if you know that, and you should. The U.S. imposed oil and metal embargoes on Japan between 1940 to 1941, and in response to Japanese expansion in Asia. Pay attention to Venezuela. Carney has not been very good to Canada. He's saying he will recognize obviously, then, yeah, I mean, Carney unfortunately talked a big game with Canada, and frankly, he could, because right now I think almost 70 to 80% of the goods from Canada are protected under the current the North American trade agreement that the U.S. has with Canada. So Canada is safe right now, but they said, hey, we want to renegotiate this thing because you're hiding behind that you're hiding behind it, and we can't touch you right now with our tariffs. But be careful, we may reconsider. And then, of course, they may comment about Palestine, and then you start a whole cycle again. So what's happening? You are in a world right now that is very unstable. Now it's easy to, yes, an embargo on Japan, right? That's what happened. Japan. So basically, the U.S. imposed an oil and metal embargoes on Japan. So now, not even tariffs. We don't want to trade with you at all, like they're doing with Cuba, in response to Japanese expansion in Asia, whatever the reason was used. So Japan views this as an existential economic threat, and they attacked Pearl Harbor. Many people said that, and that they knew this was going to happen. They wanted it to happen. They needed a reason to get into World War II. So there's a notion of that. I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but in this case, you could say, yeah, there was a trade embargo and led to war. And in the War of 1812, the American Revolutionary War. I mean, what is the Tea Party, right? The Boston Tea Party. Remember, new tariffs on finished steel and aluminum product is going to yes, and it's right now. It's hurting a lot of companies. It's hurting a lot of companies. The auto companies. The only thing is, when we say tariffs going to hurt the companies, which companies are we talking about here? Talking about industrial companies. Industrial companies make about 20% of the GDP in the U.S. and about 10% of the stock market. So it's not a big deal, right? And 50% tariff on Brazil is even less of a big deal because it's only one company, right? And I've heard about the Pakistan talking about nuclear. Well, the Pakistanis, well, that's another war that he technically saved. Saber rattling along with tariffs. Have you heard the Pakistani talking? Why would they talking about nuclear threats? I mean, right now they are at peace with India. And by the way, Trump has said that he might want to do some business with the Pakistani because of, So that 50% tariff on India is a real thing. These are all real things. And because we are not seeing anything new, you say, well, there's nothing new. No, but these are really bad things. And it can't stay on forever. At some point, someone is going to say or do something that's going to go sideways. Now, of course, it's easy to blame the current administration. You say, well, it's his fault. Well, it happens on his watch, but because you see a lot of firemen every time when there's a fire, doesn't mean that the fireman caused the fire, right? So what's going on? Well, I mean, basically these people are trying to find ways around the situation. But this would have happened even if Kamala Harris would be president. You still have to deal with the fact that the U.S. has lost its ability to produce its own rare earth chemical. And by the way, a rare earth mineral, just want to make it clear, rare earth mineral are not rare, right? It's not rare. It's not like we don't know. There's nothing rare about the earth, the rare earth mineral. Just want to make sure you understand that, right? It's just that they forgot to make it, and they don't know how to make it, and it takes too long to make it, and therefore they rather not make it. That's basically what's happening here. So we have to be clear. What's happening. And going forward, this could be a problem because you have all these stories that are piling. U.S. steel companies have not increased production; they just raised their prices for windfall profit. Right. So you're starting to realize that there's something going on, and we are slow walking ourselves into something that could turn out to be not very good. And I want you, my subscribers, or members, to understand it, to see it, because my concern is that just like we found out the stock market just collapsed on Monday morning, that we may see it happen again and say, well, what happened? What just happened? We were fine and then we're not fine. The U.S. needs to look at the long game and go back to making own. Yes. Well, because right now, this is happening, and you need to get that, is China has not closed, but they are pulling back on the rare earth mineral. They're saying, well, I don't think I want to give you that much of it anymore. I think we should wait a little bit. I think we need to talk about it. I'm not ready for. Whoa. So I thought, now what's going on? You mean I can't get my, I can't, no, not right now. I think we need to wait a little bit. So you can stop sending us stuff. Well, no, but we're negotiating. So let's see 90 days. You should be worried about that. Because if they do the same thing with antibiotics and vitamin C and all that, I mean, that would be an open war, literally, because now you're doing it on purpose. But the fact that they're not giving you the rare earth mineral, which is used for weapons, you should question and you should realize that maybe something is going on here. The much more pressing issue is microchips and semiconductors. Yes, Himanshu is totally right. I think in 5 to 7 years, the U.S. is going to lose its edge in the ability to generate semiconductors and all that. And that's why the U.S., in an incredible move, is basically taking a 10% stake in Intel. And what they're doing is they basically, the $100 billion that Biden gave you as part of the CHIP Act, we're going to turn that into equity. I said, whoa, I thought this was a grant. No, not anymore. With us, it's equity. We want to make sure you know what you're doing with the money. We want to control it. We want to start. You have to start making more stuff. You have to start to get serious. We are serious. We are running out of time, and we need to move quickly. And frankly, we're talking 1 year here because, if the administration keeps pumping this idea of getting U.S. troops not on the ground, but in the air, whatever, that's going to upset the MAGA people, and you're going to lose the election against the Democrat. Then you are going to be a lame duck president over the next 2 years. You might have a Nobel Prize, but at a big price. And then it's going to be a mess. Then everything comes down. And then the market is going to say, oh, my God, we are overvalued. I told you we're overvalued. I told you we're in trouble. I told you and then the whole thing just collapses on its own weight. Be careful. It could happen. It could happen very quickly. Right now, it's holding on. It's holding up because the administration is doing a good job of you have economic activity is strong at 3%. You don't have too much inflation. Unemployment is good, right? But now you're moving on to some other areas. Now you're getting into, war kind of situation with Ukraine and Russia. Now, of course, it makes total sense to try to stop the war and negotiate, but they're not stupid either. Why do you think they all came to Washington? They say, hey, you see how they sat? I mean, you had the president right there, and he said, look at me, look how powerful I am. And it's true. And they were sitting in front of him like in front of the teacher, right? All those nations. Why were they there? What do you think? They were there because they said, okay, you're the big daddy, right? Then you be the big daddy and you help us out and you bring your troops in the middle and you put it in between us and the Russian. And then that's how you become our daddy. He said, well, hold on. I can't do that. Oh, so what are we doing then? Well, we're going to help out. We're going to negotiate with you. Let's talk some more. Let's come back. And because they all know that, right, the U.S. is there. I mean, if Russia comes over, you're going to use a B-52 bomber. You're going to hit them with a B-52 bomber. That's what you're going to do? Because that's what the guarantee means. That's what it means. Doesn't mean you're going to help us talk to each other. We already talk to each other. So even these people, when they came over, they have their own interests. Remember, these people all have interests, okay? And this is something that you need to make. So let's follow the situation. Can you explain the Brazil angle? They have been the most vocal when it comes to BRICS increasing its trade. Yes. Well, obviously, with the administration, it is personal. But be careful. Don't be too personal with Brazil, right? Because with Brazil, what they've done, if they said to Brazil, it's 50% tariff because of what you're doing to my friend. And Brazil is now going to the World Trade Organization today, WTO. They say, this is ridiculous. They're saying this is about security. What security? What have we done to the U.S.? We haven't done anything. All right, this is vindictive. And be careful, because also what you don't see in the background is the courts are reviewing all those documents, because technically those tariffs Yes, they could be imposed by the president because Congress gave him the power. Well, not him, but the president of the United States, but only for emergency reasons. So if you're saying that, fentanyl is coming over the border is one thing, killers are coming over well, I guess we could use the tariffs to hit you with it to prevent that from happening. But Brazil, the reason he said about Brazil was because of his friend is being with the previous president of Brazil has been hit and has been basically put into house arrest. He's his friend, but that. What does that have to do with the U.S.? So basically, using the tariffs for anything you want. Be careful. Now, of course, underneath the real reason, I think, his end game is that he wants to go after the BRICS people. He wants to squash Brazil because he doesn't care. He wants to keep Russia close. He's trying to pressure India. See, he's trying to get in the middle of the BRICS thing. Now, the European thing is working great. They came to him. They played allegiance. That's working. But the BRICS people are much more different. The Chinese are one way. The Indian people are saying, no, I'm not. I don't care about the 50%. I am not doing it. I'm going to be ordering oil from Russia. I'm sorry. So he can't get through India. So by August 27th, Rubio's got a big job to do here. And then, of course, with the Russian, trying to be friend with the Russian, right? He's trying to keep the BRIC, forget South Africa, I don't think it matters, but the BRIC is trying to keep them apart as much as possible. But the reason you have BRICS to begin with is because the U.S. is too much of a big game. You can't do you got to use the dollar, everything you use for yeah, because the dollar is a reserve currency. Well, sure, but Biden used it against Russia. And that's why they're trying to do their own currency. That's why, unofficially, and China is slowly decoupling, slowly. One day, in the future, they're going to close the door. And when they close that door, you better make your own semiconductors, make your own medicine, start digging for your own rare earth mineral. That's a big job. That's a humongous job. I don't think, the current administration is trying what it is that they have, and the only tools that they have, short of invading someone, is to use the tariffs. What else could you do? Negotiate? You can't negotiate. It's take too long. But Russia being an all-weather partner, yes, of China and India, yeah. Russia is going to be meeting, India is going to be going to China very soon, and Russia is going to be visiting India. Wouldn't it be detrimental for Russia to side with the U.S. and collapse and already is thriving? Yes. And that's why they're saying, be careful. He may be talking to you, but he doesn't really want to end this thing. And he said, but I don't care. I just want a Nobel Peace Prize, really, at the end of the day. I'm 79 years old. This is it. What else am I doing this for? Well, I'm not going to see any of this in 10 years. Okay. So, yeah, Russia is Russia and China, I told you, they've been doing war games in the China Sea, where you have Chinese sailors working with the Russian sailors and going into the ships and mitigating an attack and how they coordinate. So they have signed lots of agreement they've signed together. And India is trying to get in the middle. Plus, they're all next to each other, literally, physically. So it's a lot easier to do business with these people than going to the U.S. The problem with the U.S. is like 25% of GDP. U.S. American people spend a lot of money. We need their money, blah, blah, blah. But push come to shove, what are they going to do? That's going to be the issue. So let's keep monitoring the situation. Let's see what happens. And I will be back soon.